Simulation Happy Hour acknowledges the land and the waters from which you are listening today. Welcome to Simulation Happy Hour. Sit back, relax, and let's talk about all things sim.
All right, welcome to another episode of Simulation Happy Hour, and I am joined today by Robyn Dickie, who's a senior lecturer in nursing and also the chair of teaching and learning across the School of Nursing, Midwifery and Paramedicine at Australian Catholic University, and Alison Blunt, who is a lecturer in physio and also the National Specialised Learning Environments and Simulation Coordinator for Allied Health at Australian Catholic University. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. So today we're going to talk about extended ward-based interprofessional simulation. So a big event you do every year across 7-ish campuses nationally. So what is an extended ward-based IP simulation?
That's a great question, Mel. It is very complicated immersive simulation. So essentially what we do at ACU for our final or penultimate year students is that we have created a ward that runs over 6 shifts essentially, and students move in and out in roles of that shift. And essentially it goes over 3 days, and nursing students are there for the whole of the 3 days, and students have the opportunity to be the registered nurse, so not being a student nurse but being a registered nurse, and then our allied health colleagues join us for a shift, and they also get to be in the role of OT, physio, speech pathologist. So it is very complex because there's 8 different patients that the students have to interact with. They have to do all of the usual tasks, but we're also looking for that interprofessional collaboration. So it's very great. Like, it's a great learning opportunity for the students, but it is quite complex and logistically challenging to run, which I'm sure we'll unpack. But I think the benefits far outweigh all of those challenges.
That sounds huge. Go, Alison, yeah.
It really, for the students, is their first taste, if they haven't been on a clinical placement yet, of a realistic world. So we can present them with simulated environments to practice their context specific skills in a very limited sense. It's almost like in a one little room with one client, they can practice those kind of interactions. But until you bring in all the other parts of the ecosystem, all the other members of the hospital healthcare team, it's not very realistic for what they can expect when they go on a clinical placement environment. For example, the allied health students, instead of walking in and being presented with a patient, in the immersive sim they have to find their patient. They have to talk to whoever else is looking after their patient. They have to organise themselves in a environment where other stuff is going on. So they really have much more of a cognitive load and have to practice those cognitive processes that they will need to do in the real world in order to apply what they've learnt from us within their disciplines. And those elements, I think, as clinical educators and experienced clinicians, you really take for granted that students can just walk in and get started in a realistic ward or a real ward, whereas they have real challenges with knowing when to interrupt or approach other members of the healthcare team, knowing who people are. Just those basic interactions before they even start with the client are the things that can really throw them. So this immersive world, this immersive ward is a really great way for them to actually practice those basic introductions and the things that they'll be faced with when they get onto a real ward for the first time.
Great, because in nursing, obviously third years have been out on prac, but allied health students do their practical experiences towards the end of their qualification. So they may not have been out there yet.
Yeah, and at the moment there's some differences in where this experience is located for the allied health students. So we have speech pathology, occupational therapy and physiotherapy participating in this immersive sim experience. And the speech pathology and physiotherapy students haven't yet been on a clinical placement, but the occupational therapy students have been on a couple of clinical placements. I hope I've got that correct with my other discipline colleagues.
Right.
So, and you can even see that slight difference between them, even though they're novices, just actually having been in a real world, they just understand where to put themselves and, a lot better how to introduce themselves. But the ones who haven't even been on a real clinical experience yet, it can take a lot more time to get settled in the simulation and to get started. And once they get started, they're pretty good and they're into it. But that, I guess that first period of the simulation, they're just trying to work out how to put themselves in, how to insert themselves into this situation. Not even just what to do about their patient care, but how do I actually just enter the simulation if they haven't been in a real ward before. And it's a really useful thing to sit back and to observe as a teacher.
Excellent. So what inspired the development of such a large scale interprofessional simulation? Like, who wanted to take that on, Robyn?
So for those who know me, I always love a challenge, and this was a really awesome challenge. So we were at a stage in the nursing curriculum where we were reviewing the curriculum. We had some opportunities through curriculum review to look at what we were offering third year final semester students. And what I have been doing as part of my PhD studies is looking at students' transition to clinical practice, but also really focusing more on their behavioural skills, so communication, teamwork, interprofessional collaboration. In a past life, I also was the interprofessional education curriculum developer for another university. So I had some opportunities to work with other disciplines in the past and had seen the value in that. And so when we were looking at adapting a simulation from Edith Cowan University, there was this thought of, oh, well, they get actors or volunteers to role play different disciplines. And so that's what was proposed. And I was in a meeting and I said, why would you get people to role play? We've got students on every campus. Why wouldn't you make that authentic? And a few people were like, the logistics of that. ACU has 6 campuses, which nursing is located on. But within those 6 campuses, the allied health makeup is very different. And so the logistics of that was just too overwhelming for people to sort of think about. But I really pushed for it because what I want students to be able to do, whether on placement, is to be able to, as Alison said, go up to their buddy nurse and be able to have a really good conversation with them, to be able to contact a doctor and not be scared about doing that, to be able to identify errors or to, when maybe stock has run out for pharmacy, to be able to call pharmacy. And so I wanted to build all of these things that often when you're on clinical placement, the staff around you protect you from all of those things that you have to do as a graduate registered nurse. And so I was like, no, I'm going to put all of those things in so that they actually have to do that. So I suppose my inspiration to make it as big as it is that I want our graduates to be safe, confident and competent when they go on to their final placement. And it gave them an opportunity to identify areas for improvement. So we don't teach anything new. The expectation is that they have all of these skills, but it really highlights to them and to me as their teacher to go, oh, we haven't taught that very well in second year of second semester. So we'll need to look at the curriculum for that. Or, wow, they do these things really well. And how are they doing them so well? So unpacking that for me was really important as well. So yeah, my driver is always what is the best result for the students. And then of course the outcome sequentially to that is patient safety.
Fantastic. So I imagine both for nursing and allied health, so physio, speech, occupational therapy, there were some challenges and you've spoken about some of those, but what was the challenge, I guess, to make it authentic?
We were lucky that we have the authentic environments, but we had to bring more than just the hardware and the walls and the beds and the oxygen. Like that, those kind of environments really help the students to learn and to see, I guess, what to expect when they come to that. But they also set up the interactions that they have interprofessionally. So we were lucky to have the environments, which is great. But the environments are only part of the picture. The actually having authentic other professionals there, like Robyn said, is really important. Like, why would you, in scenarios with physio students, I played the nurse, I portrayed the nurse, or I portrayed the patient. It would be so much better if we had a nursing student to portray the nurse. I really agree with what Robyn said there. And a lot of times we do filter the experience for the students and say, okay, so what would happen if your patient had pain? Or what would happen if you couldn't proceed because they had pain? And a student could come up with the idea of, well, I would go and talk to the nurse about pain relief. But actually doing that in an environment where we have a simulation ward and you have a medication room off the ward, and just like on a real ward, a lot of the times you have to go and find the nurse because they're not standing there waiting for duty, waiting for an allied health student to turn up and say, hello, I'm here. And, this is what we'd like to do, please. That they had to go and find a nurse in the medication room. And one of the big comments that I found really interesting from the physiotherapy students was, oh my God, nurses are so busy, and how I'm just going to wait. You could see them standing there and say, I'm just going to wait until the nurse is finished. And I had to sort of prompt and say, well, the nurses will never be finished. They will always be moving from one task to the next. So if your patient needs pain relief before you can proceed with an assessment, you're going to have to go and find them in the medication room. And there was this real oh, can I do that? So having the authentic environments, but having the authentic players moving around in the environments was really crucial, rather than just talking about them. So they could experience that discomfort. So they felt safe because they're doing it on campus. They know it's not real patients. They know it's a learning experience, but they did have a lot of discomfort around these interprofessional interactions. Not that they didn't think that they could do what they'd been trained to do, or that they would get a bad reaction from another student. In that way, it helped to make it a lot safer than approaching, a real nurse with 30 years experience is quite terrifying for a junior allied health person. But to actually go up to another nursing student, but still there were these barriers between, oh, can I do that? Because I had to physically take myself to another part of the ward rather than have a facilitator portraying a nurse who was standing right there nodding at them saying, yes, I can do that for you. So they were some of the really powerful things about making it authentic. And it was easy enough to do. We just had to sort of set it up that way. And a lot of those interactions and learnings, I think, in this simulation, particularly in the first year or two, Robyn, I don't know if you'd agree, we got some unintentional good things out of it. And we got some, I guess, interprofessional interactions that come under communication and task management and negotiation, which were a lot deeper than I thought there would be. So I felt that those sorts of things really increased the authenticity, the fact that you had everybody moving around like a play, or like an improv, more like that. And people had to be comfortable with that improv element of it. But they were some of the really powerful learnings for authenticity, I think.
I think too, and yes, it was definitely unintentional, but I think it was designed to have these intentional fears embedded within for students to encounter. So I think in terms of the way that we thought about the types of patients, where the patients would be located in the ward, I think we were very intentional about what that would be. So in terms of making it authentic, we had to think about the resourcing that we had. And I'm sure we'll talk about what we would love in the future. But the reality was that we had to run it on the budget that we already had allocated for those units. So there wasn't a significant amount of budget that was going to sustain it long term. So of course we had the setup budget, but that was only for the first year. And then after that, there was nothing. So in terms of the design, I had to think about, well, how am I going to get these patients to have peaks and troughs of activity, interactions with different health professionals, deliberate errors to make sure that there was some interactions between whether it was faculty role-playing doctors, because we don't have doctors here at ACU, so we had to role-play those roles, but I think it was very, I think we thought about it a lot. I know I definitely thought about it probably way
Yeah.
too much for a good year to go, oh, if I tweak that a little bit, that'll mean that that person will have to go and talk to a doctor about an insulin, and then they'll have to do a phone order for an insulin order, and they'll have to use a different form for that. And so I was trying to think about all of the different interactions that they might have. I think also thinking about what other disciplines bring. So at the beginning, in that first iteration of it, we had huge amounts of notes for students to read, particularly from an allied health perspective. And we just found that that was really overwhelming. The students were spending a lot of time just reading the notes, which is something that they probably would have done in the clinical environment before they went and saw a patient. But that wasn't the purpose of the simulation. The purpose of the simulation was for them to interact with a patient to do a task within an interprofessional collaborative setting. So that adjustment needed to occur, but that was also a bit challenging to give that feedback on. But what was really helpful is because we had co-professional observation and debriefing, that people actually saw that in action. So it wasn't just me as a nurse saying, hey, your allied health notes are really, really long. There was an opportunity for allied health staff members to go, oh, wow, they just spent time reading the chart and they didn't really get an opportunity to do what we wanted them to do. I think the other thing around the authenticity was considering the learning objectives. So we were pretty clear on what we wanted it to achieve. So there was the interprofessional learning objectives overall for the extended experience, and then each patient had their own learning objectives for interprofessional collaboration. And then within that, there was discipline-specific learning objectives. So I think from a curriculum design perspective, I think it was very intentional of what we wanted to achieve within that, within the environments that we were working in. So I absolutely agree. Like, we're very lucky at ACU across the 6 campuses that we were working in that we have these environments. Although those environments were very different on every campus. So adjusting that as well to be really flexible and say, hey, in Canberra, you've got 5 beds, another room and another room. So yours isn't going to look like what I can run in Brisbane or that someone else can run in Melbourne or Ballarat. So it was just something like the fidelity was really tricky, but rewarding when everyone came back and said, oh yeah, these students had this experience and that experience.
So logistically, so you said you thought about it for a year. So how many times have you run it, and what structures have you got in place to make it happen and to bring this together and to make it not only interprofessional in running, but interprofessionally designed?
So we've just finished our 3rd iteration. So it's been running for 3 years, which is fantastic for us to keep going. The structures, we have a nursing lead, which is me, and then there's an allied health lead. And that's changed a couple of times, but Alison, you were the allied health lead for 1 year, and another person, Nick, was the allied health lead this year, but Nick had also been involved since the conception as well. So the leads have been involved in the conception from the beginning, and the running of it from the beginning. And then within that structure, then we have a campus-based structure. So there'll be a nursing person and an allied health person. So it doesn't matter which discipline from allied health, just someone to lead it on that campus. And so they look after really the campus-based requirements, which is, all of the equipment, all that sort of, just the nuances to set it up in their environment. I'm in charge of making sure that the equipment lists are correct, which seems like okay. And you'd think after 3 years you'd have it down pat. But even like last week, one of my team members said, oh, you need to revise this because we were missing this, 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 and this. And everyone each year wants to add something different. So we realised after the first year that our dying patient didn't have palliative care OBS charts. So we're constantly thinking about how we can adapt to make it more authentic. But in terms of the structure, there's sort of the operational people. So Alison and I are quite operational, but then there's a steering group that sits on top of that that's led by Professor Elizabeth Jacob. And so we're part of that as well. So essentially, if I need anything, I go to Beth and say, hey, I need equipment here. Can you support that? So yeah, it's been really great. I think we've been really lucky. I think the people who have chosen to be involved and to be the leads of this are actually really motivated to do well in this. So I think I've been very lucky with my nursing team, and I can't, everyone has just been so supportive. Lots of feedback, but so supportive.
So I can imagine this is quite, well, a bit daunting for the students. Like how do you prepare them? What's the pre-briefing kind of processes?
That's changed a little bit over the 3 years as well too. I think in the first year we were doing lots of evaluation where we sort of had to strike a balance between giving the students enough information to have some idea of what they were walking into without priming them too much about what we were looking for them to say in their feedback afterwards, or what we were looking for from the experience. So we pre-brief at a few different levels. So there's sort of operational pre-brief information that the students get before they arrive, which is a combination of delivered sort of with verbal feedback to the students' classes and through their learning management system about what to expect when they come. There's a lot of information for them to read on the learning management system around the logistics, and we've had to change a little bit over the years with that as well too. With tertiary students, they don't often look at their learning management system information, their Canvas, even though we keep directing them there. So there was, I think, kind of like a 50-50. Some, maybe half the students turned up very prepared and knew exactly what their patients' names would be, ready to go, and the others turned up and were like, what are we doing again? So we provided enough information for them to know it would be a simulated experience, which students really enjoy simulation, and all their self-feedbacks, their evaluations of other courses, their preclinical units before they come to this interprofessional simulation, is they are asking for more simulation, so they want it. They turn up primed to be ready to enjoy it and to get something positive out of it, the majority of them, and are ready to jump in, but they feel apprehensive. Sometimes it's a balance in that pre-briefing of helping them to acknowledge there will be uncomfortable moments and they may feel apprehensive without wanting to tell them to be apprehensive. So there's pre-briefing beforehand, in the weeks beforehand about the experience. There's the pre-briefing that they get when they actually turn up. So a pre-briefing just like for simulated learning activity, which is delivered by the facilitators or the lead facilitators. It includes information about, things that are in a good quality pre-brief, like around orientation to the environment, psychological safety procedures, who the people and the players will be and what their roles will be. But in that pre-briefing, that's for the first time that the discipline students are actually meeting each other. And it's also sometimes the first time that the interprofessional facilitators are meeting each other as well too. So it's got these meta levels of, the students interprofessionally walking into something new, as well as us as the educators interprofessionally walking into something new. And a lot of the facilitators are not full-time staff at ACU. So they are clinical educators from real environments, or they're some of the casual teachers like me who work clinically as well as teach students. So it's lots of different levels that we prepare them for that. And, it's also been a challenge of in the logistics trying to get the amount of pre-briefing right. You don't want half the simulation experience time to be pre-briefing and getting started, because when the time runs out, they're like, oh, sometimes they were just finishing off a task, or they needed to find, that they all feel like that they need more time.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting the way Alison describes it, because allied health, when we were first starting, allied health wanted to give the students all the information. So it was very much like really setting them up for success. And I think success looks different in different ways. So I felt like there was this kind of desire that the students would come in very prepared and they'd feel really comfortable doing it. And my kind of view is completely opposite to that, is that sometimes when you go into a clinical environment, things are messy and you've got to find things out. And for nursing students, particularly in their final semester, they're going on to their final 6-week placement. I didn't want to give them all the information. I wanted them to know that they would be being a registered nurse on a ward, looking after patients, mixed patients. So we had a mix of surgical, medical, and mental health patients in a regional hospital, and that's what you were going to be looking after. So there was a bit of toing and froing, I think, between our teams of like, this is what we need. And I'm like, oh, we don't need that.
I don't even think that that's necessarily the discipline thing, Robyn. I think that that really reflected where the students were in their studies. So if the nursing students were finishing and graduating in 6 months' time and had done a number of clinical placements, then certainly they are ready to be challenged, and they're already used to walking into environments where they don't quite know what's going to happen. From the speech pathology and physio perspective, they're third-year students, so they're a whole 12 months behind. And you wouldn't think 12 months makes such a difference, but at this stage in their undergraduate course, it really does. You can tell the difference between a final year student and a second to final year student, regardless of the discipline, in terms of their problem-solving skills and their willingness to be uncomfortable, and how much time it took them, and, you know, scaffolding and prompting and hand-holding it took to get them started. So I think that an interesting thing about this experience is that, yes, they're coming from 4 different disciplines, but also they're coming from 4 different stages in their course. So what they have done before really plays into how ready they were to get started. But I don't think it affected their performance overall. But certainly you could see in that first settling period, the first sort of 50% of the simulation activity, when you're scanning around, you could see which students were having trouble getting started and which weren't. And it really did reflect, I think, whether they'd had a clinical placement before or not. They all found it a valuable experience, but how comfortable they were to be uncomfortable was different according to whether they'd had a simulated clinical placement before.
Yeah. So I think, Mel, to your question, I don't know that there's a hard and fast rule about what pre-briefing and briefing you should do, because I do think if you're having such a complex simulation, meeting the needs of the learner will look very different. So I think being open to that and not being wedded that every student should have all of this information is important, because you are, as Alison said, addressing the needs of the student at the time. So yeah, pre-briefing can look different.
So it's interesting because, Alison, you said before, it occurs on lots of different levels, like faculty are meeting for the first time, students are meeting for the first time. It's predominantly, I think, you know, it's set within a nursing unit.
So and in a nursing ward, like home base for nursing students. So on at least our campus, I think it's different potentially across different campuses in ACU, but the actual simulation wards that the experience took place in were the wards where the nursing undergraduate students had done all their clinical skills before, whereas the allied health students hadn't even used those actual sim rooms. They had been in sim rooms before, but in a different building. So just the difference of changing the actual location, it was like going to someone else's house as opposed to going to your house. So how comfortable you feel to extend yourself and to be uncomfortable, and just the eyes glancing around the room to try and find out where things were, does make a difference to how readily you can get started and how comfortable you feel initially, I think. So we teach a lot of our practical skills in the simulation wards at ACU for all the health disciplines, but these rooms were not the rooms that a lot of the students had been in before. So that made a difference, I think, to readiness to get started, and in the pre-briefing, needing an actual orientation to the ward. Just like, I've been a physiotherapist for 25 years, I'm pretty comfortable walking into hospital wards. But I remember when I was a locum, walking into a hospital ward in a different hospital, it does take time to get settled and to work out who's who. And the uniforms as well too was another thing as well too, working out who is who. Unfortunately, all our allied health students wear the same uniform, and all the nursing students wear their own uniform. So it was clear to see who was allied health and who was nursing. But to work out who was who in the zoo took a little bit of time. So there's this balance in going back to pre-briefing, I think, to wanting to give the information, but not wanting to give the information in the time that took up time for doing other interactions. So, and when you've got a limited amount of time, you had to, and that's some of the jiggling around, I think, of pre-briefing over the last 3 years, Robyn, has been like we've wanted to preload information before they come so that they've got more time to actually do the interactions rather than be walking around looking for charts and reading charts and things like that in the simulation.
Yeah.
Cool. So not just pre-briefing, but also facilitation and debriefing. How does that work interprofessionally, and when faculty are used to only looking after their own discipline and now they're working with someone from another discipline who they may not know? How do you navigate not only the priorities for the students, but the priorities in what that faculty do together?
It is a really difficult conundrum that we've tried hard to address. So for faculty, we do a pre-briefing and really highlight the expectations that this is about interprofessional practice. Whilst we're interested in safe practice, so if a student does something that is completely unsafe, the discipline should be able to call out that behaviour. But really, we're interested in the way that they talk to each other, collaborate with each other, negotiate, prioritise. They're the things that we're looking at. And I think that's really hard if you are not used to those types of simulations and you've just been teaching nursing students how to draw up IV antibiotics for the last 6 months. So reframing that and reorientating people to the purpose of the simulation is our ever-ending goal. But I also think it's really we role model that behavior. So I always, when I flit around for 3 weeks, I do teach, but I do a lot of making sure that people are talking to each other and that, oh, hi, you're a speech pathologist. I've never met you before. I'm Robyn, I'm from nursing, because often I found that the facilitators weren't collaborating. They were sort of observing from different perspectives rather than having that interaction at the beginning to say, hey, I'm this person, and finding a little bit about each other.
Which is so interesting, right? Because I'm no doubt in the debrief they'll be debriefing the students how they interacted, yet they weren't interacting themselves.
And I think it's because we're so used to just looking at what our discipline is, and I think we have this idea that I'm here for nursing or I'm here for allied health, and so I think that's improved over the years, but I definitely think in the first iteration it was quite challenging. If the facilitators hadn't done any interprofessional education before, they were very focused on even their own discipline. So it might have been you're a physiotherapist looking at allied health and the whole sim, but there was a lot of nuances about, I want to talk about this physiotherapy action and what they should have done and what they shouldn't have done. It's like, whoa, that's important. That's probably a conversation after the debrief with that particular student, but that's not the purpose of this. So it is really challenging, and I think it comes back to your personality and getting the right people to be facilitating these simulations, but also setting them up for success. So we've adapted manuals. So there's a big thing that they can read that supports the running of the simulation. We received some feedback that some of the events, so there's little events for each patient, wasn't comprehensive enough. So we've really done a lot of tweaking of documents to support that. And initially we were kind of like, here's the allied health things that you need to worry about, and here's the nursing things that you need to worry about. And now we just give everyone everything, and that helps them to understand, oh, well, this is what's going to be happening for the nursing students right now, and this is what's going to be required for the allied health students, so that the facilitators have that information. So that was a lesson learned.
I really agree. I think that, like you said, Robyn, I think it was important to have the right facilitators, the right people, and to keep emphasising, even though they knew they were in an interprofessional sim, that they had to debrief it and act it in an interprofessional way, that it was nice when you didn't know what discipline the facilitators were, whether they were nursing or allied health or someone like, and I didn't know all of the stuff. So it was nice when it was surprising to not know where your facilitator's background was when you saw the way that they interacted. It shouldn't, we should be able to give them advice about general things and about safe practice in particular, but you didn't want to necessarily skew things, not skew, but it functioned best as a quality interprofessional experience if it was facilitated with a real interprofessional mindset. So, when I was facilitating it and being the ESP of the ward manager or something like that, I'd have speech pathology students say, we haven't got the right thickened fluids, we need level 2, we've only got level 3. And I said, would you like me to call the kitchen for you? And they're like, oh, okay, that'd be great. And who are you? I say, oh, I'm the whoever. So it's good, I think, if your facilitators do work interprofessionally themselves. So if they are a skills teacher for a particular discipline in academia and have been that for a while, that was harder for them to shift, I think. But if you are still clinically working and I'm not in any other discipline than what I am, but I've observed a lot over the years. So I guess what we wanted from facilitators was some simulation experience, an approachability and attitude to be able to function in an improv and immersive scenario and not be too rigid about what they had to teach and what they had to give feedback on, and to have a little bit of a step back, hands-off approach so that you weren't jumping in and being a skills teacher, because that really affected the flow of things. But to actually have an attitude that they were there for all of the students, whatever they needed for their generic skills. It didn't really matter whether you put your hand on the person's arm here or there to help them up out of bed. And it didn't really matter if you were a nurse or a physio or a speech pathology student sitting a patient in the chair to do a swallowing assessment. So, you were trying to facilitate all elements of that activity to happen rather than being a teacher of a particular discipline. And sometimes you did see, it's very hard. We go into our mindsets and we're trained that way to be, the clinician that we are. But I think we really had to keep emphasising, and the fluidity and the style of the immersive sim, which, as Robyn said, has a lot of planning and ducks with feet going crazy under the water underneath to make it look so fluid, but also to be, not in your own role, your discipline role as a facilitator as well. So we tried to emphasise that over. We also consciously looked at that, I think, when we were asking certain people to be our facilitators, as whether they would feel comfortable with that flexibility.
Cool. So I know last year and we'll put the link to the paper in the show notes, but you studied the co-debriefing practices. So not just co-debriefing, but interprofessional co-debriefing. What are some challenges? I mean, I think you've spoken about some, but is there particular learnings from that?
I think, and I learned this from the great Jenny Rudolph many years ago, around holding learning objectives too tightly. And I think some of our facilitators really wanted to hold on to what they should be saying rather than, or directing the students to talk about certain things rather than letting them talk about their authentic interprofessional experiences. So I think one of the things that we notice is the setup well before you enter debriefing, and we've talked about how people need to talk to each other and the facilitators need to be flexible in their roles. And what we found was that those who felt that they were doing that often may not have had great outcomes in their debrief. So often we think we're really good at debriefing, and so we report that we're really good at debriefing, but observationally, as expert observers, we felt that the interprofessional aspects weren't as good as what they could be. So yeah, co-debriefing is a tricky one, particularly from IPE perspective, is because people are really keen to talk about what their discipline needs rather than thinking bigger. So, we have explored these ideas of having 2 tiers of debriefing, just to constraints that we have in our own environments around room availability and what value adds that for students. That's something that we're open to discuss moving forward.
Yeah.
But I do think the co-debriefing relationship that people need to form at the beginning of the pre-briefing needs to be modelled throughout so that they do get that authentic co-debriefing practice. Often people just debrief the way that they debrief doing a clinical procedural skill rather than thinking about how to open up a question and direct it to a whole group of 14 or so students. So I think it was that direction to the whole group rather than to a specific discipline can be challenging as well.
Yeah. I think it was holding on to their discipline-specific objectives for each patient rather than looking at what the interprofessional objectives were for the simulation in its entirety.
Yeah, and I think that just comes down to they want the students, and I mean like nursing students, they want nursing students to achieve X, Y, and Z by the end of their 18 hours contact time in the simulation. So I do appreciate why people would go down that path. For the nursing students, we were lucky in the fact that the morning shifts, the first 3 hours of each day were with our interprofessional colleagues, and then we had the opportunity just with nursing. So we tried to do it like a ward where allied health aren't usually there at 8 o'clock at night. So it was okay for us to be able to have that. So using things like car parks to say, hey, that's a really good nursing point, but let's talk about that in our next debrief, was a way that we tried to get students to, we're not dismissing what you're saying, but we will talk about that later. So yeah,
Excellent.
there are strategies to do that, but it takes experience, and I think we expect a lot from our facilitators to be able to debrief. So I think for the listeners, co-debriefing interprofessionally is a skill that really needs to be developed and mentored, observed. You should be debriefing debriefings, giving people feedback, and that takes a lot of time. So I must say, logistically, we have not done that, and that's something that I would love to do in the future.
It was so complex to debrief on several levels. There was just the fact that you were debriefing something where there was a lot going on. 2 or 3 hours of activity is a lot more challenging than debriefing just a simple scenario.
7 minutes in.
There's so many people who want to say things. There's the dynamics of such a big group. There's co-debriefing, even if they were from the same profession, just managing that relationship and that working cohesively. And then you add in the interprofessional co-debrief of two facilitators who just met each other today. So it was a lot to ask, and I can't really think of a more complex debriefing scenario. So we expected a lot, and we trusted our facilitators to do their very best with that. But I think that they're some were very confident with that, some were not as confident with that, and just had to go and did their best.
Yeah.
And I think as long as people had good intentions and the students, were managed safely, they all got something out of it. But I think this is a big area where we want to continue to improve and to learn and to know a bit more and to be able to put steps in place or frameworks in place for our debriefers to be able to do that skillfully and to build their skill.
Absolutely. So I guess to start wrapping up though, what are some outcomes you've seen for the students? Like, what has been the impact for them? Have you evaluated? What are you seeing?
There was a lot of data that was taken for evaluation, and I think Robyn can probably talk to that better than me. I've had individual conversations with students and I've taken some short interviews and videos of students straight after the simulation with their consent to capture their feelings of how they felt afterwards and what they would say to their peers or what they had said to their peers after the experience. And I guess that anecdotal feedback was really useful about it was a great tester. It was a great taster as well, too, of what clinical placement might be. It was challenging in lots of different ways for them, but overall that it was a worthwhile experience to do and that they recommended that their future students were to do this. And when I've mentioned this to colleagues who are actually clinical educators in the environment, they're like, wow, what a great thing to do. And that they all agreed that students needed experiences like this before they come on to real clinical placements, and that this was something that really would add value. But that, gosh, what a challenge to get the students, to do this, to set up this realistic world before they hit the real world. So I think that is, I guess, I talk more, to the value or the experiences that students had by actually being part of this. But there was a lot of data taken around attitudes and changes pre and post, wasn't there, Robyn? So
yeah, there was, but for anyone who's done a lot of interprofessional education research, as I have done, those tools are not very sensitive. So in fact, despite them giving us feedback afterwards quantitatively, there wasn't a lot of change, statistically significant change in students' attitudes or perceptions around the benefit of interprofessional education. And there's lots of literature about ceiling scores and those sorts of things for these tools. So I think when they were designed 20 years ago, when IP wasn't really a thing, now to lots of students have IP experiences and feel really comfortable with teamwork and sort of the sub themes within those tools. I think it's hard for us to evaluate that. But what we do see is that some students really love it, and there's a subset of nursing students who hate it. And they're often the students who have already worked as a nurse, so enrolled nurses, kind of don't feel that it value adds anything. And I think one of the things that I would like to do in our 2026 iteration is identify the ENs and give them a more leadership role. So they can do all the tasks and they're quite good at the time management, but I would really like them to have some challenging interactions as a leader. So that's something that our student evaluation of teaching and learning has shown me is that the ENs don't really like it and they think it's a bit of a waste of time, whereas the students who are undergraduate, haven't worked in a nursing role before, really value that. Most importantly, industry really love it. So they see a difference in our students and the preparedness for their final placement. A way that we're facilitating that is that because they get to see what they know and don't know, their goals for the placement are really explicit. So that our students come with not, oh, I just want to learn everything about neuroscience nursing. They actually come in with really specific goals because they've had 18 hours of simulated experience where they can go, actually, I'm really bad at drawing up or administering blood. They're not very good at that. Or maybe I don't know how to do an ECG really quickly. Like I can do it, but it takes me 20 minutes and that's not going to save someone's life in an acute chest pain situation. So they have more specific goals. And so our industry partners are like, wow, they are much more prepared for communicating with staff members to escalating things. So yeah, I think for me, getting that feedback from our industry partners, that is actually what I was trying to achieve.
Amazing.
Students will like or hate anything, right? So I'm kind of, and the students who give feedback are usually on the edges. So there's usually the 1% on either time. So I don't necessarily take all of that, with a glass of wine, but definitely think that the industry response and as Alison said, the facilitators who work clinically with us are really excited about this. So.
Well, it's all about what we do as preparedness for practice, right? And so if you're demonstrating that, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And getting feedback with that.
Yeah. So we do have a study, one of my colleagues we've followed up on a number of graduates or students who had finished their final placement to see what they thought of that. So we did a couple of focus groups. So that paper is almost ready for submission as
Amazing.
well. Yeah.
Now, I have one important question
for
you. So this is Simulation Happy Hour, Alison and Robyn. So if you could attend happy hour anywhere in the world, Where would that be, and what would you be having?
Well, I think my body knows it's happy hour, even though it's 11 o'clock in the morning, because my stomach's been rumbling through this whole recording. If you heard little noises, happy hour makes me hungry and thirsty. I think I'd be having a nice icy cold limoncello sitting on the rocks beside a beach on the Amalfi Coast, eating something nice and salty. Is that specific enough for you?
Yeah,
Yes,
I was thinking Bellinis at Positano, but you've
you'll be just at the beach up from me. I'll be in a tranny.
Yeah, Positano is probably too expensive.
No, I can't do Positano.
Well,
anything with a view.
Go with either of you.
Anything with a view. And
fantastic.
I love a cocktail.
Well, thank you for joining us and sharing that significant, huge, and logistically nightmare.
It's a nightmare, but I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way.
And then I'm sure there's a massive project team that you're representing.
There's a huge project team. I was trying to think in my head when you were talking earlier, Robyn, about how many people we're talking about. It's at least 12. So they're across Australia. They're across different disciplines.
Yeah.
They are across different experience as well too. So they've all got teaching experience, clinical practice experience, and some have simulation experience and are from the simulation special interest groups at ACU, and others were from the interprofessional education groups across ACU. So we all came together as a big working party, didn't we? Bringing a whole range of different skills. So
I think also
it was a real group effort.
And a big shout out to technical services.
Yes.
So this doesn't happen without them, and the people who rock up and teach for the 18 hours or 3 hours, they're the ones that actually make it happen. So there's probably about 100 people that make this happen. And we were very blessed to win a VC Excellent Award in our first year of running it. So, we're kicking goals and we'll continue to kick goals. The ball gets a bit heavier every year, just with more people wanting to be involved.
Yeah, more people, which is amazing.
Yeah, so it's really fun. And so if you're ever in ACU land on any campus, call out and come and watch us. We run from June to first week of August every year.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See ya.
Bye-bye.